Tomar may hold the real Oak Island answer. The town in central Portugal is the headquarters of a 14th century military order called the Order of Christ, and across 2 seasons of digging, 4 independent evidence lines converge on its address: a copper coin from Lot 5, a stone shot from the Money Pit area, a symbol on a colonial Nova Scotia map, and an engineering tradition the team has been matching to Smith's Cove. The A on the map. A specific letter on a colonial-era map of Mahone Bay is drawn wrong. Just one letter. The A in the word Mahone, and the writer of that 1762 chart, a Nova Scotia surveyor named Charles Morris, used a V-shaped crossbar on it instead of the standard horizontal one. On the same chart, 3 other A's are drawn the same wrong way. Every other A across the entire map is drawn normally. If you take those 4 anomalous A's and draw a compass circle through them, the lines cross over Oak Island. The same letter, the same V-shaped crossbar A, is carved into stone across the Atlantic, inside the headquarters of a 14th century Portuguese military order in a town called Tomar. It's what the team in Season 13 of The Curse of Oak Island has been building toward, one find at a time, across 2 seasons of digging.
We have your map that shows Nova Scotia, and we have a map that seems to be a French map of Oak Island.
A symbol on a colonial Nova Scotia map that matches a carving inside the Convento de Cristo, the documented headquarters of the Order of Christ after 1319. And the map is just where the pattern begins. What the map has company with. The Morris map symbol doesn't stand alone. Across 2 seasons of digging on the western lots and the Money Pit area, the team has surfaced 3 other Portuguese-pointing objects, all of them sitting inside the same century the map points to. And the 4 pieces come from 4 different parts of the team's workflow. The map is the iconography researcher's thread. The coin is the numismatists. The stone is the geologists. The drainage system is the field archaeologists' read on what's physically buried in the beach. 4 specialists, 4 different methods, 4 artifacts that wouldn't normally even land in the same conversation. Start with a copper coin from Lot 5, identified as a Portuguese tournez minted under King Ferdinand I between 1369 and 1371. From the same lot, an iron deck spike was identified on the show as unmistakably Portuguese, possibly 14th century in origin. And from the Money Pit area, a round stone shot whose composition traces to the volcanic geology of the Portuguese Azores and whose form falls inside the 14th and 15th century stonemasonry window.
Take a look at that.
Wow, look at that. What do you make of it?
Well, it looks like a stone shot, for sure. I don't see how that would occur naturally here.
Each piece taken alone has another way it could have ended up on Oak Island. Coins travel, a stone can be ballast tossed from a passing ship, and a selective letter form on a colonial-era chart can be a map-maker's flourish. The argument the team has been building doesn't rest on any single line. It rests on what the 4 lines do together. What they do together is point at one institution. When the Knights Templar were dissolved in 1312, the Portuguese kings Denis I didn't disband his country's chapter the way the rest of Europe did. He reconstituted them under a new name. They became the Order of Christ, eventually headquartered at the Convento de Cristo in Tomar, and they kept their lands, their wealth, and most of their personnel intact. For the next 2 centuries, the Order of Christ's Red Cross flew on the sail of every major Portuguese voyage of Atlantic discovery. Madeira was settled in 1420. The Azores were formally granted in 1439, Cape Verde in 1462. The Atlantic was where the order pushed the limits of what European seafaring could do. All 3 convergence points sit inside that operational footprint. The carving is in their headquarters, the coin was minted during their era, and the stone came from their Atlantic territory. Walking the lines. The work began with the map. In a Season 13 episode called A Sacred Symbol, Scott Clark, a Toronto-based mason who'd been working the iconography end of the search, walked the team through Charles Morris's 1762 survey of Mahone Bay. Morris was a competent colonial surveyor, and the rest of his chart is unremarkable. Names of inlets, soundings, coastal features. But 4 of the A's on that chart are drawn with a V-shaped crossbar that doesn't appear anywhere else on his hand. Not in the other A's on the same chart, not in the standard letter forms Morris uses elsewhere on the survey. When Clark connected those 4 points against a compass circle, the geometry crossed Oak Island. not approximately, directly. Then Clark showed the team where else that V crossbar A turns up, carved into the stonework inside the Convento de Cristo in Tomar, photographed during an earlier expedition by Cor Moll, the Dutch researcher who'd been working the Templar iconography thread on the team for years. That's the first line.
The second line is the coin. The Pit Blotto coin came out of Lot 5 in an earlier season, and it took until season 13 for it to land with a proper identification. The team brought it to Alberto Silva, a numismatist at the Luis da Silva Ribeiro Library in Angra do Heroísmo on the island of Terceira. Silva identified it as a tornase, struck under King Ferdinand I between 1369 and 1371.
By the Portuguese Ferdinand I in a period of war. In the wartime, Ferdinando, he needed to mint more coins.
The dating window is 2 years wide. The coin is uncirculated, which is the numismatic term for a coin that hadn't been handled enough in commerce to wear down its strike. A coin that uncirculated wasn't lost decades after it was made. It was lost close to when it was minted, then the stone. Stone shot of this type were the kind of round, hand-worked projectiles used in late medieval siege engines and early gunpowder cannon, shaped by the men who served those weapons or by the workshops that supplied them. The Peacock 1 specimen, recovered from the Money Pit area in Season 13, was the third in a small group of similar finds. Dr. Robert Rayside, the geologist at Acadia University, had analyzed the first two and traced their olivine gabbro composition to volcanic source rock in the Portuguese Azores. Olivine gabbro is a specific kind of dense igneous stone that forms in the magma chambers feeding volcanic island chains. The geology rules out Nova Scotia and rules out mainland Portugal too. The Atlantic islands the Order of Christ developed are where olivine gabbro of that signature comes from. Laird Niven, the team's site archaeologist, looked at the peck marks on the stone and dated the workmanship to the 14th or 15th century. Marty Lagina, on camera, gave the find his 90% confidence as a projectile from the 1300s or early 1400s. The fourth line isn't a single artifact, it's a capability. The Convento de Cristo in Tomar carries a deep water engineering tradition. The institution moved water at scale, through controlled stone channels, with the kind of durable joinery that the construction of a subtidal stone drainage system requires. The finger drains at Smith's Cove on Oak Island, a fan of stone-built channels under the original beachwork, are exactly the kind of feature that requires that capability. Cor Moll has argued that the convent's engineering tradition could have served as the precedent for whoever built the drains. It's a capability claim, not a fingerprint claim. The convent doesn't put any particular mason at Smith's Cove. What it does is remove the objection that no medieval European institution had the skills to build what was built there. Then there are the Azores. In the same Season 13 run that produced the Pit Blotto coin authentication, the team made trips to the Atlantic islands the Order of Christ developed in the 15th century. On Terceira, they found a three-pronged goose paw symbol carved into the walls of a 15th century church called the Igreja Matriz de São Sebastião. The same symbol Gary Drayton has surfaced on Oak Island. They found dry stone walls at Serreta carbon dated to roughly 1470 to 1475, matching the wall fragment from Lot 26. And they met with physicist Dr. Felix Rodrigues at the University of the Azores, whose work on a stone basin at a site called Grota do Medo had identified evidence of human activity on Terceira at or before the 11th century, with the basin itself structurally parallel to the Lot 26 well.
This is kind of similar to a rock that we have on the island.
This wood is full of these marks.
Very interesting.
The Azores aren't an extra evidence line. They're the geography that explains how anything Portuguese got from the Iberian Peninsula to the Western Atlantic at all. Without them, the Order's Atlantic reach is theoretical. With them, the stepping stones are documented. What the pattern doesn't yet reach. There's an honest counter to all of this, and it has to go on the table directly. Each of the four lines, taken individually, has another explanation available. The coin could be a souvenir from a colonial-era collector's pocket, dropped centuries after it was minted. Ballast stones get tossed from passing ships all the time, and end up in places no historian would expect to find them. Charles Morris was a surveyor in 1762, not a cipher,
and a selective letter form on his chart could be a flourish that happens to land in geometrically interesting places. And the Convento's aqueduct doesn't prove any particular mason worked at Smith's Cove. It only proves that the institution had the skills for the kind of work that was done there. Take any one of the 4 lines, and you can dismantle it. Take all 4, and the dismantling has to apply to each separately, and each alternative explanation has to coexist with the other 3. The Morris map A might be a flourish, and the coin a souvenir, and the stone ballast and the aqueduct an unrelated capability. The cost of dismissing the convergence grows with each line you have to dismiss. That's the strength of the case the team has been building. A single anomaly is a story. When the second one lines up with it, that's a coincidence the team can flag and move past. By the time you have 4 anomalies all pointing at the same address, you have what historians call a convergence, the kind of pattern that moves serious researchers off their priors. But there's a different boundary the artifacts have not yet crossed, and it matters. What the 4 lines support is Portuguese material from the Order of Christ era reached Oak Island. That's it. They do not yet support the Order of Christ built the Money Pit. The Money Pit's own timbers carbon date to the colonial period, 1655 to 1695, 1672 to 1780. The deep shaft work is on a different timeline than the artifacts that point at Tomar. If a Portuguese presence reached Oak Island in the 14th or 15th century, the structural work that followed might have been someone else's, 200 or 300 years later. Or the same party may have returned, on a much later voyage, and the shaft is theirs. The artifacts can't yet tell us which, so the address narrows.
We need to look at the mason's marks and see if they actually mean something. It may only take just one clue, one strange symbol that says, here is what you seek.
The deep shaft question stays separate, at least for now. Where the 4 lines cross, step back and look at what's actually on the table. A symbol on a 1762 colonial chart of Mahone Bay matches a carving inside a 14th century Portuguese military order's headquarters across the Atlantic. The copper coin from Lot 5 was struck in mint condition during a 2-year window in the late 1300s. The Money Pit stone shot is composed of rock that traces, geologically, to the Atlantic islands that order developed. The order itself had the engineering tradition required for the kind of stone drainage work the team has spent 2 centuries trying to explain at Smith's Cove. And the Azores stepping stones that would have made the crossing physically possible carry their own goosepaw carvings, their own dry stone walls dated to the right window, and their own structural parallels to features Oak Island has been chasing for 100 years. 4 independent dating methods, 4 different artifact types, all converging on one country, 1 century, and 1 specific institution, the Order of Christ, headquartered at the Convento de Cristo in Tomar, between roughly 1360 and roughly 1475. That's the convergence the show has been building toward, 1 find at a time, across 2 seasons of digging. It's the closest the modern search has ever come to giving Oak Island an actual address. It's not yet a name on a document. No surviving Order of Christ voyage record names Mahone Bay as a destination, and no inscription on the island carries their cross. The artifacts point. They don't sign. But pointing is more than the team had a year ago, and the address keeps narrowing. What comes next? Portugal keeps coming up. The address keeps narrowing toward Tomar. That's where the artifacts have landed the team by the end of Season 13. And it's a different place than the search has spent most of the last 2 centuries looking. The deep shaft question is still its own question. The Money Pit's timbers belong to a different era, and the structural work down there is on a different timeline. But the small material that the modern dig keeps surfacing, season after season, year after year, refuses to speak any language except Portuguese. This argument didn't come out of nowhere. The Tomar address sits on top of a deeper iconography case the show has been assembling across the back half of last season, the lead cross at Smith's Cove, the Templar tradition carvings the team has been chasing in Europe, the medieval period evidence the show has been surfacing across 2 full seasons of digging. The Templar evidence is the foundation under what you've just heard, because the Order of Christ is what the Templars became in Portugal when the rest of Europe dissolved them. If you haven't seen the deep dive on that Templar evidence the team built across the back half of last season, that's the thread that runs underneath everything you've just heard.